Howdy. Do I look all right? Yesterday, took my sister to her primary care physician's office to get a blood draw. She needs to have some blood work done. And then from there, we went and had breakfast at Kiki's. I talked to her about some of the early periods in this autobiography. She's 4 years my senior, so her memory of those time frames when I have hardly any memory is much more reliable than mine. She concurred that my brother was born when my folks and she still lived in Bartow. She also confirmed that she started school when we lived in a little two-story house. That would put me at around between 2 and 3, I guess, or somewhere along in that age. The memories I had of that, like I say, are just memories that are told to me. She reminded me of one that took place when she was first started school. She could walk to school from our house. It wasn't very far at all, but I think a block and a half, 2 blocks maybe. But my brother followed her to school because he wanted to go to school too. And she couldn't dissuade him. He followed her. She went on to school, and teachers recognized that she had an accompanying guest, but they dismissed her from school long enough to walk my brother back home and then return to school. And she did. And she said when she walked him back home that our mother told him that he would sit on the doorstep until our dad got home. And what happened after that, I don't know, but I'm sure he got a pretty good talking to. When we moved to the little house in the Grapefruit Grove, there was a 2-bedroom concrete block house, had a poured concrete floor. It wasn't elevated much. It was probably the floor level maybe 5 inches above ground level. It was so low to the ground there were no steps. You just walked into the house. That I can remember. Also, we were in the southwest corner of a grapefruit grove. There was a row of grapefruit between us and the 3rd Street, and then there were no trees right in front of the house, so that the front yard of our house joined the backyard of the landlady's house, Mrs. Carefoot. But then to the east and to the north of us was all Grapefruit Grove. I recall when the fruit began to ripen and the pickers came in and brought long, tall ladders. These were seedling grapefruit trees, which means the trees were grown from seeds from the grapefruit. And they're fairly tall before they start branching out. The trunks were probably 10 to 12 feet tall before there were any branches. And then the grapefruit grew in the canopy above. So it took a fairly tall ladder to get up there and pick those things. And to pick the whole tree, the ladder had to be moved around several spots around the tree in order to get the whole tree picked. And the way they did it was, a picker would have a tree and nobody would intrude on that tree. He would pick the entire tree and then move on to the next one. But the crew of pickers, I don't know, maybe it was 5 or 6 pickers, and they had dropped off a bunch of fuel crates, which is how they loaded the oranges to take them back to the packing house. And I was in the backyard. I was fascinated by all this activity and the real long ladders and how they could get up into the limbs and pick fruit. And I was standing close to one of the ladders so I could see the fruit picker, how he was using his hands and loading his pick sack. And he got it full and came down the ladder, and I was standing there. And the way the pick sack works, there's a latch and a strap that hooks to the top of the sack. It's held open by a steel bow or a half bow, and the picker would put the bottom of the pick sack over the fuel crate, then undo the latch, and that just opened the bottom of the pick sack, and it could be dumped real simply. And then they just pick the latch back up, latch it back into the half bow at the top, and continue to pick. But as he was unloading his sack and getting it ready to go back up, he spoke to me. He said, "You got a pick sack?" I told him no. And he said, "Well, that's too bad. If you had a pick sack, you could come on up here and help us, work with us and make some money." And I'm not sure what my response to that was, or if I had a response to it. But he said, "Well, if you don't have a pick sack, I guess I got to go up and refill this one again." He climbed back up the ladder into the tree and picked. And I had, conversations with 2 or 3 of the pickers. They didn't mind explaining things to a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, whatever I was, probably around 3 when we were there when that happened. And the making money thing, at some point, either a windstorm or a rainstorm or something had come through. There were a bunch of twigs, small branches from the trees that had scattered in the yard, some overripe fruit that had fallen. And I don't know if it was my mom or my dad, but one or the other said that if we would clean up the yard, we could make some money. So we were gathering up twigs and whatnot, piling them up in a corner in the yard, close to the corner closest to the street, so they could be picked up by the city. But I'd make 2 or 3 trips and I'd start feeling around in my pockets, seeing if I could feel a nickel or something. And then there wouldn't be one. And I'd make 2 or 3 more hauls to that corner, and then feel around in my pockets again for a nickel or some coin. There was nothing there. And I asked my brother and my sister why we didn't have money yet. And of course, neither one of them had an answer for me. They weren't quite sure what I was talking about. But when we did finish, Mom or Dad, whoever, gave us each a nickel. So that was my first lesson in economics. When you make money, it doesn't just magically appear in your pocket. Somebody has to pay you. Whoever hired you has to pay you for your work. Valuable lesson learned. That stuck with me forever. We played a lot of games. We had pretty good imaginations, and living in seedling grove with the tall trees, we were always in the shade. We never had to worry about getting overheated in the sun. Plus, the canopy gave us all sorts of forest related pretend stories that we could act out in that grapefruit grove. And that we had a lot of fun doing that. We played maybe Robin Hood or who knows what kind of games we were playing, but I remember playing lots of games and having lots of fun doing it. Also, at that time, there were refrigerators, but not everybody had one. And there was an ice house in town owned by Mr. Baker. And he would make regular runs, maybe it was every other day or every 3 days or whatever, through town with his ice truck, which was a pickup truck with a wooden bed and big chunks of ice in the bed, rectangular, smooth rectangular blocks. And he kept those covered with a double layer of burlap. And when he would stop at his regular customers' houses, he would chip off the amount of ice that they wanted. The rectangular blocks that he carried were probably 120 pounds or 150 pounds. They're good sized blocks. But in chipping them off, there would be slivers of ice all over the bed of the truck. And me and my brother and sister and other kids in the neighborhood, whenever his truck came around, we'd follow his truck. And he would toss slivers of ice to the waiting kids, and he'd make sure everybody got some. So we had ice to crunch on a summer day. It was always something to look forward to. Another thing my sister mentioned was that when we lived there, we got skates. Or apparently one Christmas, or at least they got skates. I don't recall having any skates, but maybe I was too small for skates. My folks didn't want to have me breaking something. My sister remembers learning how to skate on the sidewalk in front of Mrs. Carefoot's house, and skinned knees and skinned elbows in the process. Like I say, I don't remember having a pair of skates myself. Maybe I did, but I just don't really remember it. But also during that time frame, a hurricane passed over. This would have been in 47 or 48. Not sure what the actual time frame would be. And I remember the rain bands coming across. It would rain real hard, and then it was like and the winds were whipping around. I remember hearing that noise, wondering what was going on. And of course I was told it was a hurricane, but I had no idea what a hurricane was. But the rain got heavy enough that it got ahead of the drainage around the place, so the water was rising up. And apparently it looked like it was going to start coming into the house. And my dad went over to ask Mrs. Carefoot if we could come over there to ride out the rest of the storm, and she agreed. So my dad carried us from our house over to Mrs. Carefoot's house, wrapped up in a quilt, and he would be hunched over us to protect us from the elements. And by this time the rain had gotten really hard, and the wind had picked up quite a bit. And in that grapefruit grove, the way the wind was whipping around, it was flaying grapefruit all in every direction. And I don't know where I was in the sequence, first, middle, or last, but when Dad was carrying me, I remember him being hunched over me to kind of protect me from the wind. And as it turned out, the flying grapefruit as well, because he got hit in the back 2 or 3 times. And I have a very vivid memory of being held close to him, wrapped up in that quilt, with him hunched over me. And I'd hear, when a grapefruit would hit him in the back. They weren't doing any, damage, no bruising or anything like that. It was just the suddenness and the impact. Grapefruit can be pretty heavy. They're good, large-sized fruit. But I heard him grunt 2 or 3 times going from our house over to Miss Carefoot's house. Had a lot of good times when we lived there. There may be other memories that will come to me later on, but those are some that are pretty strongly ingrained. If I have more come to me in the course of making these videos, I'll be sure to mention them. But as far as this one, that'll do.